And if you design and build cities that don't have green spaces or water or blue spaces, you exacerbate that kind of trend. So biophilia is the hypothesis that we're doing bad things to human beings by removing them from contact with nature. And I'll try and explain why this becomes relevant to water again in a little while. But just to say that pre-industrial humans used 3 times more energy per day than present-day humans, simply because on average you walked about 17 miles a day, and most of us don't do that at the moment. Inactivity increases the likelihood of obesity, which you've all heard in the media is in epidemic proportions in the country. Cardiovascular disease, it's associated with a reduced life expectancy now. And this is the thing about the 85% of the population live in towns and cities, and this is the information about children. Physical inactivity results in 1 in 25 of all deaths in the world annually. So you can see the case I'm trying to make. There's some relationship between human well-being and interconnection with the natural environment. There's some connection with motivating people to be physically active and being in nature. And if you start breaking those connections, perhaps things start to go wrong. The population issue, let's just go through that bit one more time. So these are the populations in different times. So just before the Battle of Trafalgar, there were 1 billion people on the planet. And in 1927, 2 billion. By the time I'd finished my first degree, there were 4 billion. And today, there are something like, these figures are a bit on the high side actually, but there are about 6.8 billion people on the planet at the moment. I don't think we'll get up to 9.4 billion. I think that was a bit of an overestimate, but something like maybe 8.2 billion by 2050 is like realistic. And I did a silly calculation very early this morning. It's probably wrong, but it's a ballpark kind of figure. One average person contains 40 litres of water. So in year 1, when there were 200 million people on the planet, there were 8,000 million litres of water inside human beings on the planet. Today, by 2050, there'll be 376 billion litres of water inside the human population on the planet. That's kind of interesting, I think. I don't know what it means, but I think it's interesting. And we can discuss that later. So we have a huge number of people detached from nature, living in urban environments. They actually have a lot of water inside them, and there are lots of discussions going on worldwide about the transport of water around the world. Now, in America, they're buying up the water rights in lots of countries around the world. Fiji, you've probably seen these little bottles of water that you can buy from, they say Fiji on, and actually they come from Fiji. And it's an American company that bought up the water rights in Fiji and now send these bottles of water all over the world. And there are very big issues, I think, with the transport of water around the world. So when you get your tomatoes that come from Egypt, they're not just tomatoes, they're tomatoes with Egyptian water in. And it's taking water from Egypt, it's called green water, and it's moving it to other parts of the world. So not only do we have all this water in people who are being redistributed around the world, with all these chemical reactions going on in it, we also have all the foods and the products that we eat and drink being moved around the world following these people. And the consequences of that in the long term have yet to be really fully understood. Now again, let's pursue the theme of natural versus built environments, urban environments. We're moving into these urban environments. So some environmental psychologists a few years ago did some really nice studies where they got lots of pictures of natural settings, lots of pictures of urban environments, and they showed them to people, and then they did psychological assessments on them to see who preferred what. They also measured their blood pressure, heart rate, cortisol in saliva, measures of stress and relaxation. And there was an overwhelming support for the notion that they vastly preferred pictures of the natural environment. And you can see it from this kind of illustration. So this is a typical US city. How do you like that picture? Do you feel kind of warm and cuddly about that? Is this getting any better? Do you start to feel better when you see these things? So if we'd done those surveys on you, you like to see a few trees kicking around in the environment in which you live. We don't really know why, actually, so I'm setting up a laboratory in the medical school to try and find out what are the cues and clues that we pick up from nature that make us feel good. So if you go out into the natural environment, if you're stressed, if you're worried, if you're tired, stressed with work or whatever, and you go and walk on the seashore, or you walk in a leafy forest, or sit in a park, you normally feel a bit better. But there must be some triggers that you're picking up from nature that stimulate that, and we don't know if it's the colour of the trees or the sound of the birds, the smell of the new mown grass, whatever it happens to be. So we're setting up a virtual environment laboratory where we can control all of those factors and measure people's responses to it. So I'll let you know perhaps in a few years what we found out. But anyway, something to do with natural environments. Now the question is, we've known the green space stuff for a long while, but does water make any difference? And we ended up with the idea that maybe it does. So the more water that you see in pictures, on the whole, the more people prefer it. So we actually have done a study on this where we took pictures of urban environments and gradually introduced water into them. And this is a kind of urban environment. If you start putting ponds or canals or fountains into these kind of pictures in a dose-response kind of way, so more and more and more of it in those pictures, you find that people much prefer, in urban environments, pictures with more water in. If you then do that for green environments, for natural environments, the more water in them, the more people like them. Again, in a dose-response fashion. So we did this study and we found the built environment people prefer it least, and aquatic environments with a little bit of green in, people prefer it most. And we've just published this study. This is just a quick summary of it. So water is profoundly more motivating and good for people. People like it. They feel physiologically and mentally better when they're somehow engaging with water, which may explain why if you go to a hotel, you're willing to pay, and I can tell you on average people do this, about 10 to 15% more for a room with a view of the sea than one looking out onto the car park or onto a green space. It's why 50% of the population prefer to live, in fact more than 50% of the population prefer to live near the coast. And there are many other signals, like when we go on holiday, many people choose to go to the coast and be near water, or to a lake, or to a river. So there's some sort of case building here for people's association with the aquatic environment and with water. And we can keep making this case, and I don't say it's proven by any means, but I think it's intriguing to raise the question, do we have aquatic origins? Are we in any way associated with the aquatic environment through our evolutionary history, even more so than with the green environment? Well, one of the great proponents of this idea was Sir Alister Hardy. Does everybody know who Sir Alister Hardy was? He was a man who made the link between phytoplankton production in the sea, all the little algae, the plankton in the sea, and the amount of fish that the sea produces. And he was a fantastic marine scientist. He went down to Antarctica and did interesting things there. But he also proposed the notion that actually human evolution, in terms of brain development, really took off, not when people clambered out of the trees onto the plains, but actually when they made it to the coasts and started living in coastal areas, started consuming seafood, which is one of the only sources of omega-3 fatty acids, one of the major sources, getting a lot quickly, that would actually facilitate the rapid development and growth of the brain. And unless you have a lot of omega-3 in your diet, your brain just can't develop fully. So that was one interesting piece of information, and that was the omega-3.